ARE Podcast, episode number 23.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. ARE Podcast, where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host. His favorite workout soundtrack is Run Lola Run, David Doucette.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode number 23 of the ARE Podcast. Today we're going to talk all about moonlighting, and joined once again by our co-host, Eric Corey Freed, up there in Portland, Oregon.
Up there amid the woods and the trees and the rain in Portland.
Are you in your cabin today?
I'm just trying to stay dry, most of the time.
So before we start, we're going to talk all about moonlighting. But before we do, I want to share this email we received about a podcast we did earlier this year. It was episode 13, 8 tips to help you land your first job in an architecture firm. So we got this email a few months back. I finally dug it out so we could share it. So I'm going to do that right now. It's from Danny in Salt Lake City. He writes, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you guys for this episode. I had been trying to get into the architecture and building systems design industry for a couple of years. After submitting so many cover letters and resumes and only getting 8 interviews, I was about ready to just stop looking and continue with my comfortable job at the post office. A mentor of mine told me about a position with a local electrical company doing drafting work. I had recently listened to this podcast and changed my standard cover letter for one based on the suggestions I heard. It was 3 paragraphs, I name dropped, it was different from the body of my email, and I gave the PDF a funky name. These were all mentioned in my interview, along with the fact that I was with the post office for 10 years. The next day, I received an offer of employment. Once again, thank you for this excellent episode. So that was pretty cool to hear. And actually, he called, well, first of all, I guess in that episode, Eric, we discussed the 8 tips preparing cover letter, resume, getting the interview. Probably the most important one, I think, is number 2, cover letter, because that helps separate you from the others and let you stand out and basically get the interview, because that's what we need to do at that point.
That's the goal. That's the purpose, the reason for cover letter is to please get me in, get me in there. Let me show you what I can do. And most people fail to do that in their cover letter. And instead it's more like, working for you would be so great for me. I would learn so much.
Well, and that's for those that actually include a cover letter. And as we talk about in that episode, your email is not the cover letter.
No.
A lot of people do that. As you and I, we've been business owner for many years, and we have seen that. So anyway, listen to that episode. But also, I think you were the one that mentioned, Eric, about give the PDF some interesting name.
Oh yeah, because I get 3 resumes a day sent to me, and they're all named resume.doc or resume.pdf, and I'm thinking, are you serious? I have to rename it now because you were too lazy to realize that more than one person's going to apply for this job. That's silly.
In Danny's name, he sent the cover letter. His file name is Danny with his last name. Danny explains why he should be a part of the GSL team.pdf.
Yeah, and that's
right. That's eye-catching, right?
Perfect. Yeah. Which one's going to get open first? Resume.doc. Or Danny is awesome. I mean, basically, it's obvious.
So that was exciting. Glad we got to share that. So episode 13, definitely check that one out. Today, we have moonlighting. And what exactly is moonlighting? And as we were joking before, it's a series with Bruce Willis back in the 80s, which many of our listeners may not be familiar with, but
no, but you can watch it on Netflix. It was in high school. It was one of my favorite shows in high school.
That's when Bruce Willis had hair, too.
A little bit, yeah.
All right, so how does moonlighting apply to us, and why do we want to understand it, even if we don't, participate in it? It's something I guess we should know something about.
Well, first, you and I were arguing about this the other day. I don't know if most people even still call it moonlighting. that might be an old expression, but moonlighting is essentially doing work on the side where you have a day job and then you're at night, taking on your own projects.
I think they call that consulting now.
Yeah, it's
like everything
all fancy.
everything seems to be consulting. Okay, so it's sort of working on the side.
But in one sense, you might think, oh, that sounds awesome. It sounds almost too good to be true. I'll have my job, and then plus I can kind of build a little name for myself and a client base and a reputation and make more money. But the realities are different, and you need to know the full story in order to proceed, because you run the risk of exhausting yourself, or worse, getting you and your firm in some sort of liability or trouble.
And many firms won't allow you to moonlighting, and we're going to cover all that stuff today. So you can't just be sort of ignorance of the law is no excuse, so to speak. So if you are considering doing it, obviously check with your firm. But this is what we're going to talk about. So what should we talk about first?
Well, first, there's a bunch of considerations that I just wanted to explain to the audience. And as you said, your firm might already have a no outside work or no moonlighting policy in place that you don't even know about, that you just they gave you an employee manual and you just kind of skimmed through it. So first, you shouldn't be shy about this. If you have an HR manager or an operations manager or a business manager, or if you're in a small firm, it's just the principal, there's no harm in just asking the question. Ideally, you would do this before you've started moonlighting, but ask, what is your policy on outside work, and they might allow it, or they might have an exemption. A common one that I saw in a lot of firms was that if you wanted to design your parents' house or your uncle's house, that they would let you do that, because that if it benefits your family members, that you're totally allowed to do it, and that would make a lot of sense. But you might also be asking yourself, well, why would the firm not let me do it? It's my own time. I can do what I want, right? And then that starts to get into other issues.
Well, in the types of moonlighting work that realistically we're talking about at this sort of stage of our young career is really probably residentially based, maybe a deck addition, maybe a bathroom addition, something small, something residential. We're not talking moonlighting for a wing of a hospital kind of project.
No, you probably couldn't do that on your own. Anyway, and if you landed a project that big on your own, why would you keep your job at that point? There'd be certainly enough fee to keep you going, and you could quit your job and hire people.
So what would be, from, let's say, the employer's perspective, what would be sort of the reason I wouldn't want my employees to moonlight?
Well, one, it saps, from an employer's perspective, it saps my employees' energy. That's kind of a big one. I don't want them kind of groggy and tired all day if they've been up all night, building models and drafting for someone else. Okay,
so number one, it could affect my employees' performance on the work in the office.
Right, and maybe they're drinking a lot of coffee or Jolt Cola or whatever, or they think they're still in their 20s and in studio and they're cranking through. Even if they're able to hide it and maintain high energy levels throughout the day, there's a larger issue at hand, which is legal issues.
Go ahead.
Oh well, it might sound silly, but if you're working in a firm and you're doing your own work for someone else, you are potentially exposing your firm to liability. So if let's say you heaven forbid, forgot to detail something correctly, and something bad happened in the building, a balcony fell, or someone got hurt, even worse, or even if it's minor, it caused damage. So there was some economic damage, but nobody got hurt. No matter what the case, if you were to get sued doing work that you had done on the side, your firm is potentially liable, because you might have done it on their equipment in their office using their plotter, and that is enough that potentially it would expose your firm to liability.
Well, and also the way that attorneys typically work on cases like this, that when things like this happen, attorneys sue everybody. So
Right.
they're gonna sue whoever supplied the wood of the deck. They're gonna supply who did the design, the engineer. They're gonna sue everybody they can, and out of that, they're gonna go to who's got the insurance, who's got the big insurance. So you, as the little moonlighting designer, you're not gonna have any money. So they can't go after you for this money. They're gonna probably try and connect it to the firm and somehow prove that, hey, he or she did this work on the firm's computer, or they did it after hours, and now the firm is involved, and now they got the insurance policy. That's where they're going to go.
Right. They're going to, what do they sue you and take your iPhone away from you? That you probably don't have much for them to take, but a firm has resources and insurance, and an insurance company that's probably eager to settle very quickly. So from an attorney perspective, wouldn't it just be easier just to sue the firm that you work for, knowing that they probably get a quick settlement for their client? And you could argue that it's not right and it's not fair, but it's the reality that we live in, and so that's what you're exposing your firm to.
It's the reality, and it's how it works. I mean, I've haven't been in these, I guess, particular situations, but I've talked enough to attorney friends. I've been involved enough sort of business workings. That is exactly how it works. Everybody gets sued, and okay, let's shake the tree and see who's got the insurance policy we can go after.
Exactly right. And so, in addition to that, if your firm were to get sued because of something you did, you're probably going to get fired. I hate to say it, or even more minor, if they catch you moonlighting, and even if nothing had happened, that's enough to get you fired.
Yeah, if you're not supposed to do it, or if you don't have permission to do it, and back in the day, I remember I did do a little moonlighting. I did like this side handicapped rail, back in Boston, and I think I did use the plotter. This is when we had plots and plotters. I used the plotter at the office to print it out. It was like 3 sheets, not a big deal. In retrospect, knowing what I know now, I should have just asked my boss for permission, and he would have said yes, but I didn't, and so that looking back, I should have done that. There's no reason to keep it secret.
No, I mean we are a profession of professionals, and as a result, honesty is always your best asset. So I don't think you should ever lie about it, and you might be surprised at your firm's approach to it.
Yeah, and life lesson coming up, and I give those to my boys every once in a while, but just don't dwell in the gray area. I did design build for a number of years. I have contractor friends who live in the gray area because that's kind of one of the few ways you can actually make a profit at the end of the day. But I always do my books. Everything is all on the up and up because I like to sleep at night. So I don't play in the gray area, mainly so I can sleep at night,
Right. Right, which kind of leads us to go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it kind of leads us to, okay, in spite of all this, and you still want to moonlight, how do you do it? What do you look out for? What do you know? And what are maybe some ways that you can do it on the up and up?
Right. So what we're talking about now is if your firm allows the moonlighting, how can we do it? So
first is, what do I charge? That's kind of a common question. I'll have friends, I just got my first potential project. What do I charge? And the short answer is charge more than you think. If you don't charge people for your time, they'll abuse it and they'll take advantage of it. And you'll probably at some point in your careers will have multiple times even someone say, well, you should do this for the exposure, or you should do this because it'll lead to other work in the future. You didn't struggle through architecture school and struggle through the AREs and all the studying, so you could work for free. So I'm adamant about this. You should, if you're doing your professional expertise for anybody, you should charge them for it.
And don't be ashamed and don't be embarrassed to bring it up right at the sort of first meeting or in the conversation. And don't be so excited to get the little job. It's like, oh, we'll just talk about the fee later. Like, don't do that. And this is coming from years of experience where I used to do that initially, and it just never works.
Never works.
And then you get in a situation where you do a bunch of work and you send the client a bill and they're like, well, why is it so much? Because we didn't agree, and it just avoid that.
Right, exactly. And then on top of that, if they are paying you, the amount that you should charge should be higher than you expect, because unlike your current job, the client's not going to take out taxes. So you're going to owe taxes on that money that you're now earning. And so you have to factor that in. And you might also be thinking, well, gosh, I make, $40,000 a year. That's $20 an hour about. I'll charge 25 and oh, look how awesome I am. That's not enough. If you're making about $20 an hour now, you should probably be billing yourself at least at 65 an hour.
Yeah, I'd say 3.5 times. But
Yes.
But to that point, because this is, if we're doing it, how do we do it on the up and up legally, right? We've got permission from our firm or our boss. Yeah, we have to pay taxes on this. So this is additional income. So whenever we have additional income from wherever it comes from, we have to pay taxes on that, meaning we have to notify the government, let the government know when we do our taxes at the end of the year. So we have to keep all that information. Don't think like, oh, I can just deposit it in my checking account and I don't have to pay taxes on it. You do. And you don't want to be at the risk of getting audited and all that stuff. So you're paying taxes on it, which is going to be, depending, 20, 30%, whatever it is, somewhere 15 to 30%. So yeah, you got to figure that in.
So your billable rate should reflect that accordingly. So it's usually at least 3 times, maybe 3.5. At your firm, you could even find out what they're billing you at. If they're paying you $20 an hour, they could be billing you at 75 or 85 an hour, right? For all we know.
Right.
And that's kind of the business that we're in. It's, our product is our time, and that's what we're selling.
And we might be faced with, they don't want to pay us hourly. They want to pay us, $500 for this deck edition. And
Exactly.
We might be thinking, well, I've never done a deck edition, so I don't know how long it's going to take me. So how do I figure how much to charge?
Yeah. Oh, I'll crank it out in an hour, and then it takes you 50 hours, and suddenly your hourly rate, extrapolated, seems like, oh my God, I'm making nothing on this deal.
And one thing I'll give as a piece of advice, because of the moonlighting, we're talking these smaller sort of residential projects. And different states are going to have different requirements. Different building codes are going to have different requirements. Personally, especially in your young career, I would always have an engineer look at my drawings or stamp them, or at least look at them and consult. Because sometimes, depending on our state, we don't need actually a stamp to submit these drawings. But I would just recommend always have an engineer look at this stuff. Right.
It could be a great learning experience for you. If not an engineer, then at least a licensed architect, just to kind of make sure you're not exposing yourself or your firm to any liability.
Yeah, definitely. So make sure somebody's checking your work. Now, what would be the reason, like moonlighting, is this something we go out and actively seek, or is it something where it's like a cousin's brothers wants a deck and they're sort of, hey, they heard we're in architecture school or we just finished architecture school and they think we can do it? Like, how do we?
That's really the point, right? Why you? Why are they coming to you? Because I went down to the building department and they said I needed an architect, so just be a glorified draftsperson for me and draw this up. Is that the job you really want? I mean, maybe if it's good money, you might want to do it, but you need to ask yourself, why do you want this moonlighting? Why isn't working 40 to 60 hours in a firm enough for you? Why would you be willing to give up all your free time, nights and weekends, to do other work on the side? If it's for the money, then your motivations are clear, but oftentimes it's not. It might be for the creative experience or the portfolio building or the chance to eventually launch your own firm. So you need to ask yourself, why are they coming to me? If it is my brother's, cousin's, uncle's, sister, well, then maybe you're doing them a favor. But you can also say no or refer them to somebody else. Do they love you and your work, or is it just you happen to be at the right place at the right time and they just need a warm-bodied architect to do it?
And here's the kind of biggest caution that I was just thinking of it as you were talking, the biggest reason not to do it. You could really open up a can of worms, and it could be way more trouble than it's worth. And believe me, these simple, even a little simple deck edition can turn into a nightmare. And it could be something that, wasn't provided in your drawings, or you thought, I could spend a couple hours on it and be done. And then the contractor screws something up during construction, and it just really opens this can of worms, and everybody is mad at you, all because you wanted to make $250. And you could get dragged into small claims court.
Right. Being a professional is also knowing when to say no. So if someone says, come on, I need someone to draw this up, this deck. Come on, do it. And you don't have a duty to say yes. You can just say, no, it sounds awful. Or no, there's not enough fee. Or no, it'll take me a ton of time and it's not worth it. Or I don't want the stress. You can say no. Hold out. Have faith in yourself that better and more exciting projects will come along.
I've had people come to me when I was licensed, or as I still am licensed, but it was up in Malibu. They wanted this huge deck addition out over this hillside. As soon as I heard hillside, it's like, no way. It's like, I don't even, that is such a huge headache and sort of time waster, really.
Well, plus in Malibu, so you have the CEQA requirements and you're half a block from the water, the ocean, and it'd be a regulatory nightmare.
It'd be a nightmare, and you'd have to charge basically $70,000 in fee to even make it work, and like that wouldn't even be worth it to me because of the headache of just dealing with logistically all that stuff. And I will say, if just like you were saying, your cousin's brother hey, we just need a draftsman, just a couple hours of work. It never is. Never, ever, ever. It's always much more involved than that. And if it's not initially, it will be 6 months down the road when something's happening during construction and now they need something else. Right.
So that kind of brings me to this list that we've created of no-nos, things not to do.
It's funny now that we're sort of recording this episode. It's almost like I was originally thinking like moonlighting could be good. Get your feet wet a little bit, make a little extra money on the side. But kind of as we're talking about it, and I'm thinking back on sort of all the stuff I've done over the years, it's almost like I'd avoid it. It's just not worth the potential headache.
Yeah, I mean, if someone pitches you a job and your first reaction is ugh, that's probably a sign you shouldn't take it.
It's Okay, so what do we got? Okay. Let's say we do, maybe we do have a good moonlighting opportunity. So let's change it up a little bit. So, but I guess you were going to go to the no-nos.
Right. So, if it's a residential project or even something smaller like a deck or something, depending on your state's jurisdiction, you might not need a license, right? But that being said, if it's anything larger and a license is required, don't practice unlicensed. I can't stress this enough. I guess I can keep repeating it, but don't ever practice unlicensed or hold yourself out as licensed if you're not, or misrepresent yourself in any way. First of all, it's illegal. It's also immoral, and you really run the risk of getting in a heap of trouble.
And check with your own state licensing board to find out when exactly license is required. The states will vary. And it all depends on the state you are doing this in. And yeah, they take this stuff seriously about, practicing without a license or holding yourself out as an architect or basically tricking the public into thinking you're an architect when you're not. It's a big deal, and don't do it.
But in the state of California, for instance, you can build a 3-story house without a license.
You could design, not build.
Well, design,
Choice of words.
Choice of words, but good point, right? You can design a 3-story house.
Actually, not to just further correct you.
You deal with this every day. Why don't you enlighten everybody?
No more than a basement. No more than with a basement 2 stories in height.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, you don't need a license.
And you can't have multiple dwelling units either. They're very specific about it.
Yeah, they're very specific. But you'd obviously have a structural engineer, or should have, when you're doing something like that. But to this point, you just brought that up. Once you become licensed in the state of California, this is California's requirements, which I'm sure other states are probably similar. Even though you design, let's say, a 1-story structure, I don't need a license for that, right? But if I'm a licensed architect in the state of California and I design this 1-story structure, I have to now stamp and sign my plans, even though a license isn't required, because the state is saying it's not about the project type, it's about you, the architect. So it's the responsibility is you, has nothing to do with project type once you're licensed, because it's the responsibility.
Yeah, if I do a deck now, I have to stamp it. Anything,
Exactly.
any documents that I prepare, I have to stamp. But so be it.
Yeah. Okay, where were we when we got? It sounds like we got off a tangent.
No-nos.
Yeah, we're still on the no-nos.
You went into professor mode all of a sudden, but we're the second no-no is don't use your company's equipment. Don't use their office. Don't use their plotter. Don't use their copier. Maybe you can use their code books as a reference, I guess, because maybe nobody would be able to. But you could easily. Not only are you using your company's resources, which cost them money. They had to pay for the ink. They had to pay for the toner, the paper, whatever. So that's kind of not fair. But you are exposing them to that liability we mentioned.
Well, also, I guess in these no-nos, it sounds like, at least with the don't using the company's equipment, it sounds like now we're talking to somebody who is sort of circumventing and not asking their boss for moonlighting, if they can do it. And they're sort of just trying to do it on the sly,
Right.
Which absolutely don't do. Yeah. So if you're going to do it on the sly and not tell your boss, don't have any part of it in the office. Do it at home. But again, if you're moonlighting on the side, get your, find out if it's okay with your firm.
Right. Number 3 is, okay, if it's okay with the firm and, and the project is what you want and you're doing it for good reasons and you know why, and you're now committed to do it, just don't exhaust yourself. Don't kill yourself. You'll burn out really quickly working a full day and then a full night on something else. And people will notice, first of all, you'll get those, the bags under the eyes and then in your energy level, and people go, are you sick? And I'm speaking from experience. I know this for a fact. So don't exhaust yourself.
I don't think you get the bags and all that till you turn 40, though.
Oh, really? I've had bags, I think, my whole life.
Okay, what else?
Number 4, don't rope in your coworkers or even just trust them. Don't brag about it. First of all, you don't know if they're going to keep it a secret. You don't know if they even know it should be kept a secret. Ideally, you're telling your boss and everything's in the clear, but you also don't want to rub your coworker's face in the fact that I'm making more money than you on the side. Like, that's no good will come of it.
Yeah, I would definitely don't tell anybody. Like, if it is okay with your firm, it's not something you sort of advertise. It's an agreement between you and your sort of boss or firm owner, and that's it. Nobody else has to know.
Yeah, wouldn't that be awful if you start bragging to Jimmy in the cubicle next to you that, dude, I'm making all this money at night designing this house, and then suddenly Jimmy starts looking for work and he leaves the firm or something, right? And so you could start a mass exodus in your office and really upset your boss.
Yeah, it could get political really quick.
Right. All
right, what's next?
Number 5, if you're caught, never lie. You've already lied at this point. You're right. You moonlighted or moonlit. Is it moonlit? You've moonlit without permission. And so if your boss comes to you and and this has happened. I have friends that have done this. They left a sheet in the plotter. They plotted something with their title block.
Right.
They left the plotter, and the boss comes with the sheet and says, Jane, what is this? Fess up right away and beg for mercy. That's my biggest advice for you. I'm sorry, I should have told you. It was a small job and I'll pay you for the plot. Like, immediately just come clean. You could get fired right there on the spot depending on your firm's policy, but still never lie. Never lie,
and to a point we haven't mentioned yet. If we're working for a firm who, they do a lot of commercial work, they specialize in commercials, commercial stuff, movie theaters, restaurants, hospitals, whatever it is. And we're doing a little, 600 square foot addition for a master bedroom, for a friend. They're probably not going to care. They probably might, even if we're caught, they'll probably be more lenient on us. But if we're working for like a small firm who they specialize in residential work, and second story additions, and you're trying to do that on the side, now you're actually competing with your firm. They're not going to take to that lightly at all, and you probably will be fired.
No, it looks like that's work you could have brought in here. That's work that we could have gotten, and you're taking food out of our mouths. That's how it's perceived.
Yes.
Even though you might have justified it by, oh, this is too little for our firm, or they wouldn't have been interested in this, or whatever. That's not how it's going to be perceived by your boss.
And that's actually a great point. I'm glad we just brought this up, because this is probably the one of the more valuable points we're making right now. If you are working for a residential architect and somebody wants to do a small job, and your firm, it's not the kind of work that your firm does because it's too small, but you could take it to your boss and say, hey, I have a friend, they want to do this addition. Is this something you want to do? And he'll say no. And then you can say, well, do you mind if I do it sort of on the side, and maybe you can sort of coach me and help me?
Exactly. So suddenly this becomes an opportunity. You might even, and I've actually done this, you might even say to your boss, well, if you don't want it, can I have it? And could I even hire you for 3 hours of your time for consulting? Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't everybody win in that situation? And suddenly you come off as such a professional. You've been honest and upfront and above board throughout the whole thing. And it's going to change your boss's perception of you as someone that he or she can count on, rely on, and know to always do the right thing.
Yeah, here we are, 32 minutes into the episode, and this is probably actually the best piece of advice so far, now that we're sort of talking about it, because if you do that, your boss is also going to totally trust you and know you're not going to try and do stuff behind his back, and also know hey, this person was able to get this little job. If they get a bigger job, I know they'll bring it to me and sort of give me the offer to do it for. It's just a very professional thing.
You just gave me chills.
Right? So great. So I'm sorry it took 32 minutes to get into the episode before we got that nugget, but that's probably the biggest thing that I would do. And to the point too, in being upfront, if our firm just does the commercial stuff, one way to approach this is just be like, hey, boss, I got an opportunity to do this little deck addition. What should I do? Or can I do it? Or can you help me? Because they could help you. And like you said, you could hire them for a couple hours of the guidance. They would probably love that.
Exactly. And you're not lying. That's the best part. I mean, lying, it takes a physiological toll on our bodies. And, we're racked with guilt, and, we can't eat, and, it upsets our stomach and gives us nerves and shakes. It's not good for you. And it's your body's way of telling you don't do it.
And moonlighting, it's not new. You're not the first person to do it. So your boss and your superiors who are older than you have all been in these same situations. So they're going to know exactly where you're coming from. So it's not like you're going to have to apologize for this or be embarrassed. They're going to know. Yeah,
that's kind of the funny thing. From your perspective, your ego is running amok right now. You're thinking, somebody wants to hire me and give me money. And I've seen this a lot with past staff is, they'll get so excited. And that can cloud your judgment a little bit. It almost becomes an endorphin that's, almost like a drug. And you're, oh my God, I'm going to make this extra money, and I'm going to buy a new 3D printer with it or whatever, and I'm going to do all this cool stuff. And you're forgetting the fact that other people have been in this situation before.
Exactly. So a couple more no-nos. Definitely don't do this without a contract. Never, ever, ever. And I have done this before, unfortunately. And it's one situation in particular cost me a lot of potential revenue. But always have a contract, even if it's for $75 to do something. Have it written down in a contract.
You want it, yeah. The purpose of a contract is so that way it's clear to all the parties involved. Here's the work that you're expecting me to do, that I'm willing to do. Here's what I'm willing to pay for it. And ideally, a contract would also include, if we want to terminate the contract, here are the requirements. Here's how invoicing is done and when I expect to be paid. You'd want to be clear about that, and you'd want to do it before you start the work. That's the purpose of contracts. Just because you're doing it on the side doesn't change the realities of business.
And here's a good tip, because your contract can have whatever you want to have in it. However, once you become a licensed architect, your state board chances are they'll have conditions, or they'll have things that have to be part of the contract. As California, there's 5 things that have to be in a contract. So check with your state board. just include them now so you're used to them, you're getting used to using them. But also on this contract, services for deck design, that's not going to fly. Or it'll fly, but that's going to get you in trouble. I'm doing drawings for a deck design. I'm doing 3 sheets. Each sheet is going to have this, be as specific as possible, because when you're not, and this is coming from experience, and I know, Eric, you've been there too, when you're not clear in your contract, expectations get skewed, and it just becomes a mess later on.
Yeah, I would say that when I look at my contracts today after 20 years, there's clauses that I've added over the years, and each clause has a story.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Oh, this is a mistake. This is the mistake I made on that job. This is the mistake I made on that, and you learn as you go. But you want to be as clear as possible. You can't just say, I'll draw your deck drawings. That's meaningless. But to say, I will submit a set containing these sheets to enable you to get a permit for this deck, that's much better. And
the friend or the cousin who wants this will be like, oh no, we don't need all that. We just need this drawing just to do. And you have to be like, no, for me to do this, this is what I need to provide. Because they're going to want you to do as little work as possible. But there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes. And so push back. And if they're like, no, we don't need all that, then it's like, I can't help you. Don't be afraid to say no.
Yeah, and by the way, once you get licensed, you could get in trouble for doing work without a contract, especially in state of California, for instance, it's not permitted.
Yeah, exactly. Architects get reprimanded for that. And then what's our last no-no?
The last one, and this one is going to be the controversial one, is I strongly suggest some version of liability insurance, errors and omissions, or E&O insurance it's called, especially if this is your first job. If you don't want to spend the money, because maybe you don't know if you're going to keep doing freelance work, do you proceed without it? I would say no, but maybe if you're going to proceed without it, at least have a licensed architect or engineer look over it, or do something. It's worth paying them for 3 hours of their time to review your drawings just to cover your butt.
It's one of the things I've learned over the years when considering taking on new jobs. It's always like, okay, what's my liability exposure if I do this? And we might think, in our sort of young years as architects to be, that doing a deck is not a big deal. I can charge $250, spend a few hours, all good. Well, the reality is the deck gets installed, and there's details you didn't provide, and the water gets in there, which, by the way, water intrusion is the main cause of so many construction defects. So water gets in there, year and a half goes by, it rots, and it just starts to collapse. And, nobody got hurt. This is not life-threatening. But now the homeowner has to now spend $8-9 grand to have it rebuilt. They're going to come after you and be like, hey, this is your fault.
Exactly.
And you could say, no, it's not. And then they're going to go to small claims court. And small claims court, small claims court is, in these kinds of cases, they typically going to side with the consumer. There's a heavy burden on us as professionals, even though we're not even licensed at that point. We're trained as an architect. So I think in a small claims court's mind, we're still a design professional, let's say. So that could really cost us a lot of money. So now we to make $250, we just spent $8 grand to sort of rectify this silly situation. So, and that's kind of where I was going earlier, that moonlighting just, in the big scheme of things, may not pay.
Early in my career, I bought an $1,100 window.
Did you really?
Why did I buy a window? Because I made a mistake on the drawings.
Wait. Say that again?
Well, I ended up making a mistake.
Hold on. I want to say, this is what I want to get to. Eric, why did you buy an $1,100 window?
Because I'm an idiot, and I made a boo-boo. It was a minor one, luckily, and obviously one that didn't jeopardize anything. But I showed one size window on the window schedule and the plans, and a different size somewhere else. And the contractor ordered the window that was shown, which wasn't the one that the client specifically asked for and was spelled out clearly in the program, by the way. And so because of those weird set of circumstances, I bought an $1,100 window. And then by buy it, I didn't get to keep it either. Because what am I going to do with this giant heavy window? So
right.
the contract, he felt bad. I mean, I still can see his face.
He felt bad, but he's not going to give you the $1,100 for it.
Yeah, he's like, I'm sure not going to eat this.
Yeah.
So you are.
Exactly.
And, yeah, that's the way it works.
Was that a moonlighting job or just early on in your career?
No, that was as a licensed architect. That's what's even worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff. We open ourselves up to liability, even when we don't think that. So again, even like a deck, right? You think, well, I don't need insurance for that. You're not going to get liability insurance to design a deck. But you're going to get taken to small claims court if something happens. Like that's how that would get remedied. And that's probably how a lot of these sort of small moonlighting jobs, if something happens, we're not talking somebody getting seriously injured. We're talking more probably construction defects because maybe the contractor didn't build it right. So then you're going to get dragged into small claims court. And depending on your state, I think California is $7,500, is the maximum. And though that very quick, that moves through very quick. And as I said, the court is often going to side with the consumer, So, all right. So that's our no-nos. So now that all our no-nos, so what are the pros of this moonlighting thing that we hear about?
Well, if we haven't terrified you enough and scared you off completely, there are a lot of benefits to moonlighting or doing work on the side, right? First of all, it is a way to build your portfolio. It is a way to potentially launch your own practice. Certainly, it's a way to make more money, and to do it in a way that's kind of that in between, where I don't have enough to quit my job and just start. I only have one project, but it's a way to like get that going and maybe if you're doing it on the up and up with your boss, maybe it is okay to use the plotter and their equipment if they're okay with it. So you can do it with zero startup costs. So suddenly you can put yourself in the architecture business pretty quickly. And
which can work. And they could allow you to use the equipment and maybe you pay for your plots,
Exactly.
Again, this situation would work if your firm does commercial and you're doing this residential stuff. But if your firm is doing residential, depending on how much support you get, may or may, depending on how small the job is. But yeah, it could be the beginning of launching your own practice.
It's also, thinking a little larger, it's also a great way just to help you discover why you're looking at other jobs in the first place. Why aren't you fulfilled by your job? Why this need? Is it pride? Is it ego? Do you need more money? Oftentimes these will raise issues that you might not have been aware of. I had a staff member who was doing stuff on the side. He had told me about it. But from my perspective as his boss, my thought was, am I not paying you enough? Do I need to pay you more? I mean, are you struggling to eat and pay rent? And it turned out, yeah, he was broke. He's student loans and just life. And so I gave him a raise.
Right.
And suddenly that transformed, it went from him trying to make ends meet and doing this work, not because he wanted to, but because he had to suddenly be able to relax. And I had a better employee as a byproduct of it.
So it's interesting because I guess if I'm going to moonlight, obviously the more money is attractive. But I would just caution if that's sort of the only thing you see or that's the only motivation, it's going to be short-sighted and that probably will come back and bite you in the butt at some point. Like it needs to be more than just a money thing. Yeah. Money is wonderful, right? But you're gonna burn yourself out pretty quickly if you're doing it just for the money. It's hard to really motivate yourself to work a full day and then work a full night just for the money. And I think it's also a good way, as you just mentioned about, why are you doing this? Like, what is not fulfilling you in your full-time job? It might be a good way of discovering things that you like. Like you might have a commercial job or working in a commercial firm. You might decide, I really like residential, or I really like dealing with homeowners, or I like doing these bathroom additions. Because commercial and residential, that's actually a good subject for a podcast. It totally two different skill sets. So you might, because they're so different, especially with clients, on the commercial side, where you are in your sort of career, you're probably never going to come face to face with a client. But if you're doing this moonlighting, you're working with a client, like they're hiring you. Like that's exciting, like that's empowering, and it feeds your ego. Like, wow, I'm important. I get to work directly with this homeowner or this client, my first client.
Right. It's also this. I think it's also this very tempting idea that you're going to apply these skills that you've been kind of observing. You've been seeing your coworkers and your boss and your principal, employing these skills, and now you get to step up to the plate and do them. And that's very tempting, especially for smart people. They want to start applying their knowledge, and so to me that's a huge draw. It's a
huge draw, and actually I'm glad you mentioned that, because if we're working in a big firm, if they even let us to eventually go to the job site, it could be a long time before we actually see something tangible of the results of us drawing. But if we just do this deck edition, like we get to go to the job site and be like, wow, I designed that deck. Like that is a really cool feeling.
Hey, look, a Simpsons connector.
Exactly, right.
That's what it looks like in real life.
The contractors are looking at you like, what? Boy, you haven't seen that before?
Yeah.
No, I didn't know that. Oh, is that what that is?
Oh, rebar. Ooh, it smells nice too. Like you could really get into it.
They're like, yeah, it's in your drawing. Well, yeah, but I didn't know really what that translated to,
Sure.
So it is exciting. I mean, and you really get to sort of apply what you've learned over the years, and you get to see it in front of you. So, that's a big pro of moonlighting.
And the experience, the experience you're getting here also is building your confidence and your kind of professional, credential.
It's the kind of thing of, like let's say I don't have any experience in moonlighting. How do I learn how to do it? It's by experience. It was like, people are always or used to ask, like, how do I prepare for backpacking? Like, I'm going on this backpacking trip. Like, how do I prepare for it? How do I get backpacking experience? Well, you go backpacking. You go and you see things like, oh, I forgot to take this, I forgot to take that. So next time you'll take those, you'll remember that. Same thing here. It's like you learn by doing it, and you get better each job you do.
Right. The first time you go camping and you forget a fork, to eat the meals that you packed in, you're probably not going to forget it ever again.
Exactly. And then, okay, so confidence building. That's a key one.
I would say it's one that's probably not talked about, but it's one that I think keeps coming up in this podcast over and over again. Whether we're talking about applying for a job, keeping a job, or even just talking to your boss for a raise, confidence is the key to your path to being a real professional.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, and it's not talked about a whole lot, and it's something I think probably a lot of us struggle with, and I think a lot of us think like everybody knows everything else, or everybody knows more than me, or everybody's better than me, and I'm just going to be this lowly intern, So all this stuff, if we start stepping outside of our comfort zone, it's going to slowly build our confidence.
Right. And by the way, the inverse of that is not doing that, not being willing to step outside your comfort zone, not being willing to take on new things, stuck in that loop of, gosh, everybody knows more than me, little old me, will wear you down. It's actually a downward spiral. And I see a lot of people do this. They quit the profession. And from my perspective, they never really gave it a chance.
It's similar, I think, to the people who do all the hard work of architecture school and they don't complete the AREs because they're afraid of failing, essentially. And like anything else, like this moonlighting, everybody's got the fear. And I think sometimes people who have the fear think they're the only ones that have the fear. It's like everybody's got it. It's just there's those of us who have the fear but choose to move forward anyway.
Right.
And then, okay, so what's more creativity about?
Well, the idea is that, I wouldn't take a moonlighting job unless it also offered you an opportunity to be more creative, something that is lacking from your job, whether it's you do commercial all day and you want to try residential, or a different project type, you work on hospitals all day and now you want to work on aging in place, or, something that could even be related, but it gives you an opportunity to let your creative juices flow and do something that you could really get into. And then that will build your portfolio at the same time.
Yeah, if you mentioned this earlier, but if it doesn't sort of whatever this moonlighting opportunity is, if it doesn't excite you, then just don't do it. A deck could be very exciting to us, especially if we haven't done it before, but after you've done a few of them, it's like, nah, just don't do it, because it takes mental brain space. Even these small deck editions, they consume a lot of mental brain space.
Right, and brain space that you could be spending studying for your ARE, by the way.
Exactly. All right, what are our alternatives? Let's say moonlighting. It doesn't necessarily appeal to me, but my relatives are now asking me to do this work, but I don't really want to do it. What can I do?
Well, you have some options here. The first one is, just see if you can bring the work into the firm. We call it the rainmaker approach, where you go to your boss and say, listen, I was approached about doing this project. It's for my cousin's girlfriend's sister's uncle or whatever. They want me to do it, but could I bring it into the firm? How happy would your boss be, you coming into their office saying, someone wants to give you money? That's basically what you're doing. And a lot of firms will even have a policy, written or unwritten, that that if you bring work into the firm, two things will happen. One, you'll get to be project manager on that job. And two, you might even get a cut of the fee. And I know this because my firm has that policy, right? If any staff bring work into the firm, and this has happened, they get to be in charge of it, obviously, unless they don't want to. And then and they get, I think it was like 5% of the profits or 5% of the fee. I forget the structure of it, but it was a little bonus essentially, and not a bonus that you'd sneeze at. I mean, a type of bonus that it makes it worth your while, because I want to incentivize them to bring it into the firm.
And if I'm just thinking about this, actually, that is actually might be the smarter approach, because then you're going to sort of be shepherded and guided and basically hopefully prevented from making any mistakes that's going to cost you a bunch of money later on.
So it's first of all, it's the most honest thing you can do. You would experience what a real contract would look like, how real billing would work. You'd have the full resources of the firm. You'd be able to put your name on it, and you're not lying to anybody. And by the way, you don't have to exhaust yourself because you don't have to do it at night. You can do it during your normal working hours. Everybody wins.
Exactly. That's a great one. What else do we have for alternatives?
Well, if you want to do this other work, you don't want to bring it into the firm. Maybe the firm doesn't do this type of work, right? It's a residential firm and this is a commercial project or whatever. I would still talk to your boss before accepting this. Because from the boss's perspective, she or he is going to wonder, are you not fulfilled? Do you need the money? Why are you doing this? Maybe it's also a chance to have a discussion about your career path and your career goals, I'm doing this work because I want more creative outlets and I'm not getting them here. Your boss wants to know that, and she could actually do something about it.
And it could also bring up the conversation of, as you were just saying, your career goals. You could say, in 8 years, I want to own my own firm. Typically, your boss is going to be receptive to that because they don't necessarily expect you, especially if you're good. They sort of know that I don't know how long I can keep this person. So they may be receptive to that, and they may support that. They may support this moonlighting, and they may support you over the years of you helping moving towards your goal of, opening your own firm or opening your own practice, as long as you're not going to competing probably directly with their sort of market, whatever market they're in.
And then the last alternative, and this one's a little unusual because it involves a little bit of luck, but if you've done this where you've expressed to your boss that I want to do this other work on the side, or I was offered it, and what do you think? You're not coming in barking orders that you've taken it. You're asking their professional opinion. It's going to put in their mind that you're open to this kind of thing. And believe it or not, that your boss could end up passing work along to you in the future.
Yes, that's a good point, because they're getting requests from their brothers-in-laws and sisters-in-laws, and hey, you're an architect, because they don't really know what they do. So they're like, hey, you're an architect. Can you do this bathroom addition for us? And the firm doesn't do that.
This happened to me several times in my career. The first time was I was I was young. I was still unlicensed. I was just out of school, and my firm was picked to design an exhibit, and nobody wanted to do it in the firm. No, everybody was like, "Ugh, it's an unbilled, it's an unpaid client, but it's important because it gives us a lot of exposure, but none of us want to do it. Make free do it." That was basically what happened. And
Right.
he said, "Are you interested? We'll pay you, of course, but none of us want to do it." Well, it made total sense. I was probably the lowest paid person in the firm.
Right.
I was at the time. I got to go nuts and do a whole creative thing. I got to pitch. They were my client. I got to pitch my boss on the vision for this exhibit design. And it was a great portfolio piece right away.
And then, all right. So is that our alternatives?
Those are our alternatives.
Okay.
But then I have 3 stories to tell, and they're very quick.
We're at 56 minutes, so give us one of them. Pick your best one.
All right. The best one is well, first of all, when I was working in New York, I wasn't making any money. I was broke. So at night, I didn't want to moonlight. So instead, I did odd jobs. And at night, I would drive a cab. I did that for a while.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
You drove a cab in New York?
Yeah, I hated it. And then
How long did you do that for?
I think I lasted 6 months.
Wow.
And this, by the way, is in the early 90s when there's no power windows, no power locks, and a lot of the cabs didn't even have the partition in them still.
Right.
So it was jarring to my nerves.
Wow.
But I was trying to make money, and when I hated that, then for a while I was an usher at Broadway theaters where they would call you and say, we need an usher for Cats tonight at 8 p.m.
Right.
And by the way, there were no cell phones back then either, so I'd have a message on my machine, and I'd have to rush down to the Winter Garden Theater.
Right.
Right? I know that. I remember that well. And then I would usher people in, and then they give me $100 bill, a crisp $100 bill.
Was this during architecture school or was this afterwards?
This is after graduation.
Okay.
Sadly, yeah, it was after graduation.
Okay.
But the story I wanted to tell was I'd moved to San Francisco. I'd worked for a firm. I was unhappy in that firm, and I won't mention any names. And I was out talking to people about my vision for, sustainability in architecture, and I got a client. The client was for a whole house. So it wasn't a deck. It wasn't a dinky thing. It was like, design me a whole house. And the mistake I made was I didn't want to tell the boss because it was also a residential firm. I didn't want to lose the job. It was a creative output for me, and it was, to me, a launching pad to having my own firm.
Which at the time was that your plan sort of all along? Like you knew at some point you'd have your own.
That was my goal.
Yeah.
My whole career was to be on my own, right? So here was this opportunity that fell in my lap, design this house, and he wanted me for my principles and my vision that I had been spouting off at a cocktail party. And so it looked from on the surface, it looked like a great thing. I didn't give him a contract. Mistake number 1.
Right.
I was working all day hard on my own, my job. And then,
so you did take it and you didn't tell the boss. You didn't tell your boss because it was competing work, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah. Okay. So mistake number 1, you didn't have a contract. Mistake number 2, not telling your boss.
Not telling the boss. I'd work all day and then go home and then work all night on this thing. And I poured my heart into it, and I was exhausted. And the other folks were like, "Are you sick? What's wrong with you?" And I burned out. And honestly, within about 2 months, something had to give. The job wasn't big enough for me to just quit my job.
Right.
But it wasn't small enough that I could do both.
Right.
And I didn't want to let go of either one. And I ended up quitting the job in the hopes
Which
that I'll
job?
find the paying job, like the real job.
You quit your full-time job.
I quit my full-time job in the hopes that I'll find more work, or this will lead to more work. So here I quit my job, and I had this one job that wasn't enough to sustain me, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a contract. The guy who was a speculative developer guy who wanted to build his house, he stiffed me.
No way.
Totally stiffed me. And so here I am now out of work and not being paid for all this work that I did, and no future prospects.
And no contract.
And no contract to fall back on. Rookie mistakes across the board.
Holy cow, we should have started the episode off with this story. Why are we waiting 60 minutes in?
I wanted to wait because I wanted to kind of apply all the lessons that we just learned here.
Right.
And so what do you do? And so this comes to part 2 of the story. I was new to San Francisco. I didn't know many people. I had interviewed with 21 firms.
How old were you at this point?
I'm 27 years old.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right. You're getting older.
I'm getting older, right?
Yeah.
27 years old. And new city. So the only contacts I had were these 21 firms that I'd interviewed with, one of which had hired me, so I couldn't contact them. But I went back to these other firms that I'd liked. And I said to them, I need work. I need some money. But I don't want a job. Is there any work I can do for you? You already know what I'm capable of. You'd offered me a job. Is there any work I can do for you? And you'd pay me for it. And I would get money and you would get work and everybody win. Could we do that? And so my lessons of dishonesty and greed and whatever that all backfired turned into suddenly going to these firms and saying, listen, I don't want a job. I don't want a full-time thing. I want to do my own thing. And so with 3 different firms, I had organized this partnership really where there would be weeks where they would have whole projects for me to run and I would run them and I would come and go as I pleased, but I was free to go get more work.
So you're like a consultant essentially.
I was a consultant.
Yeah.
They paid me as a consultant. I had full access to their plotter, to their code books. They even let me use their conference room. But I paid for my time, right? So if I plotted something, they gave me a code that I would put into the plotter, and they would bill me for those sheets.
Right.
Which is only fair because I would build it to the client.
Right.
If I used their conference room, I would sign it out the same way anybody else would, and suddenly I was on the up and up. I was on the level. I wasn't lying to anybody. I didn't, I had my own business cards with my own information, and then I had business cards they had given me to represent them, and I wasn't deceiving anyone. And so it was such a contrast in just a very short 6-month period of time between lying and hiding everything to just pure honesty all the time. And it was wonderful.
Well, also, I love this consulting idea. God, that should be another episode. I'm thinking because it's another way to work in sort of the environment you did this 20 years ago, but even that we're in now, where a lot of firms, they're hesitant to hire full-time employees, but they have work. So a consultant is somebody that they can hire sort of on a part-time basis, but like you did, if you got a couple of 3 consulting jobs, now that's full-time work for you, and you're really helping out each of these firms because it's work that it's not quite enough to hire a full-time person, so you're helping them with their workload essentially. It
was really wonderful because I didn't realize this at the time, but what I had tapped into was we don't have enough staff, but we don't have enough work to justify hiring somebody, paying them a 401k, health insurance,
yes,
vacation time. So here I come along saying, you don't have to give me any of that. Just pay me for what I work. And so I was helping them as much as they were helping me.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's put that on the boards for that's another great episode of just basically how to start, because you were young too. You were like starting your sort of career out. And I didn't know that. That's a good one. So,
and 1 year I was consulting to all 3 firms and I'm bouncing between all 3. And in 1 year, I remember I went to 3 office Christmas parties because they liked me, and they said, well, of course you're coming to the Christmas party. So I went to 3 Christmas parties in 1 year for my offices that I worked in, even though I was a consultant.
And that's a situation that you created rather than just sitting around, feeling sorry for yourself. You created that situation. So
well, there's nothing like the impending rent being due. That'll drive you to go make money very quickly.
Of course, yeah, for sure. All right, so I think that's going to wrap it up. Anything else you want to add before? So moonlighting, yes or no? Should I moonlight? Let me ask you that.
I think yes, if you're honest with your boss, if you're honest with yourself about your reasons why, and if you're honest with the amount of work and the contract and everything else of how to do it.
Perfect. Well said. That is going to do it for today's show. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the ARE Podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan, practice,